Right now, you believe you could stand up and walk across the room, and nothing seems more obvious than that. But more than 2,000 years ago, a Greek thinker built a series of arguments so cunning that they seemed to prove, with pure logic, that you could never cross the room at all, that motion itself is a lie, and no one has ever fully escaped the trap he set. Try something for me before we go any further. Imagine you want to walk to the far wall of a room. A simple thing you have done 10,000 times without a single thought. Before you can reach the wall, you must first travel half the distance to it, and surely no one could deny that. But before you can cross that half, you must first cross half of the half, and before that, half again, and so on without end. To move even a single step, it seems, you must complete an infinite number of smaller journeys. And how could anyone ever finish something infinite? This is the strange and dizzying world of the thinker we are about to meet. Hold that thought tightly, because he is going to use it to unravel everything you take for granted. And by the end, you may never look at a simple footstep the same way again. The man who dreamed up that maddening little puzzle was named Zeno, and he was born around the year 400 before the Common Era. His home was Elea, a Greek colony perched on the sunlit coast of southern Italy, a small city that would loom enormous in the history of ideas. We know frustratingly little about the details of his life, for the centuries have swallowed almost everything except his arguments. Yet those arguments alone were enough to secure him a place among the most influential minds who ever lived. He is proof that a single, well-crafted idea can outlast empires, temples, and the names of kings. Whole libraries have been written trying to answer the questions he scribbled into being. Not bad for a man whose face and voice are lost to us forever. To understand Zeno, you must first understand the man he loved and served above all others. That man was Parmenides, the towering philosopher of Elea, whose ideas Zeno would defend with the fierce devotion of a disciple. Parmenides had made an astonishing claim, one that struck almost everyone who heard it as pure madness. He insisted that all of reality was one single, unchanging, motionless whole, and that the world of change and movement we see around us is nothing but an illusion. Where ordinary people saw a bustling, shifting world, Parmenides saw a frozen and eternal unity, and Zeno believed him completely. To defend that man became the entire mission of his brilliant life, and he would defend him in a way no one had ever seen before. Picture the scene when Parmenides first taught this doctrine to the people of Greece. He told them that motion was impossible, that change could not truly happen, and that the many separate things they saw were secretly one. And the people, quite reasonably, laughed. They pointed at a bird in flight, at a runner in a race, at the simple act of walking down a road, and they asked how anyone could deny such plain and obvious facts. To them, Parmenides seemed not profound but ridiculous, a man so lost in his own logic that he denied the evidence of his own eyes. You can almost hear the jeering of the crowd across the centuries. Yet the young man standing beside Parmenides was about to silence every laugh. History would remember not the laughter, but the young man who answered it. It was into this storm of mockery that young Zeno stepped, blazing with loyalty and brilliance. He could not bear to see his master ridiculed, could not stand by while the common crowd dismissed the deepest truth he knew. So he devised a strategy of breathtaking cleverness, a way to turn the mockery back upon the mockers themselves. Rather than trying to prove directly that motion was impossible, he would attack the beliefs of the ordinary people from within. He would show that their own common-sense view of the world led straight into absurdity and contradiction. His plan was not to shout louder than the crowd, but to think more deeply than all of them combined. And what he came up with was pure genius. It was a strategy worthy of a master of war, fought entirely with ideas. Here lies the secret genius of Zeno's method, the weapon he wielded so masterfully. He did not begin by asserting his own strange conclusions, which no one would accept. Instead, he began by assuming that his opponents were right, that motion and plurality were perfectly real, exactly as everyone believed. Then, Step by careful step, he showed that these ordinary assumptions led to impossible and ridiculous results. If believing in motion forces you into logical nonsense, he argued, then perhaps motion is not so obvious and real after all. This was a stunning reversal, using common sense to destroy common sense. Watch closely, because this move is the beating heart of everything he ever did. It is one of the most elegant tricks in the entire history of argument. This clever style of argument even earned Zeno a special title from a later giant of philosophy. Aristotle himself, one of the greatest thinkers who ever lived, called Zeno the inventor of dialectic. Dialectic is the art of arriving at truth by exposing the contradictions hidden inside an opponent's position. In creating this method, Zeno gave humanity one of its most powerful intellectual tools, a way of reasoning that would echo through philosophy forever after. Every debate that proceeds by revealing the flaws in an argument owes a distant debt to the sharp mind of this ancient Greek. That single invention would shape the way human beings argue for thousands of years. Every courtroom and every debate still carries a trace of it. Now let us return to those famous puzzles, for they are the true jewels of his legacy. Zeno is said to have crafted many arguments, perhaps as many as 40, though only a handful have survived the long journey to our time. Each one was designed to show that the ordinary belief in motion or plurality collapses into impossibility when examined closely. They are deceptively simple, easy enough for a child to follow, yet so deep that they have tormented philosophers and mathematicians for 24 centuries. Let us walk through the most famous of them together and feel their strange power for ourselves. Do not be fooled by how simple they sound, for simplicity is exactly where their danger hides. Each is a trap dressed up as a harmless riddle. His most beloved puzzle of all concerns a race between a hero and a humble tortoise. Imagine the swift warrior Achilles, the fastest runner in all of Greece, agreeing to race a slow and plodding tortoise. Being sporting, Achilles gives the tortoise a modest head start, certain he will overtake the creature in mere moments. But Zeno claimed, with a straight face, that mighty Achilles could never catch the tortoise, not if he ran for 1,000 years. It sounds absurd, even insane, and yet the argument behind it is fiendishly difficult to escape. You already know how this race ends in real life, and that is precisely what makes the puzzle so maddening. Prepare to have your certainty quietly taken apart. Settle in, because this little race is about to bend your mind in half. Follow the logic carefully, and you may feel the ground shift beneath your feet. By the time Achilles reaches the spot where the tortoise began, the tortoise has crawled a little further ahead. When Achilles races to that new spot, the tortoise has again moved a little beyond it, slow though it is. Every single time Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the creature has inched forward to a new position. There are infinitely many such points to reach, Zeno argued, and so Achilles can never truly close the final gap, forever drawing nearer, yet never arriving. Read that again slowly, and notice how each step seems perfectly reasonable on its own. The horror is that reasonable steps have led you somewhere impossible. Sit with that for a moment, because your mind rebels against it, and it should. You know perfectly well that a fast runner catches a slow tortoise almost instantly, for you have seen such things with your own eyes countless times. And yet, when you try to say exactly where Zeno's reasoning goes wrong, you may find the words slipping away from you. That is the terrible beauty of his paradox, that it pits your certain knowledge against your careful logic and dares you to choose. For over 2,000 years, the sharpest minds alive struggled to explain precisely why Achilles does, in fact, win the race. Your eyes and your logic are now at war, and Zeno is standing back to watch the battle. Choosing a side is far harder than it looks. Another of his puzzles takes aim at the very idea of an arrow flying through the air. Picture an arrow loosed from a bow, streaking towards its distant target, as clear an example of motion as anyone could name. Now freeze that arrow at a single instant of time and ask yourself a simple question about it. In that frozen instant, the arrow occupies exactly one position in space, No more and no less, just as it would be if it were standing perfectly still. But if the arrow is motionless at every single instant, Zeno asked, then when exactly does it ever move at all? It is a question so simple that it feels like a trick, and so deep that it is not. Try to answer it, and you may find yourself strangely lost. The everyday world is about to turn into a genuine philosophical puzzle before your eyes. That arrow paradox cuts even deeper than it first appears, striking at the heart of time itself. If time is made of individual instants, and in each instant the arrow is frozen and still, then motion seems to vanish entirely from the world. Movement, it seems, cannot happen within any single instant, and yet time is supposedly made of nothing but instants. So where in all of that does motion actually live? Zeno had found a way to make the simple flight of an arrow seem utterly impossible, a mystery hiding inside the most ordinary sight in the world. Suddenly, the most familiar sight in the world becomes a genuine philosophical monster, and you begin to see why these puzzles refuse to die. The flight of an arrow, of all things, becomes a doorway into the mystery of time. There was yet another puzzle, sometimes called the dichotomy, which may be the most unsettling of them all. It returns us to that walk across the room with which we began this strange journey. To reach the far wall, you must first reach the halfway point, and this much is beyond dispute. But to reach that halfway point, you must first reach a point halfway to it, and before that, a point halfway to that. The task splits endlessly into smaller and smaller pieces, and Zeno concluded that you could never even begin to move, let alone arrive anywhere at all. This one does not merely stop you from finishing, it stops you from even starting. And that makes it perhaps the most haunting of them all. Once you truly grasp it, a simple walk to the door starts to feel almost miraculous. Notice the fiendish twist buried inside this particular argument. In the race with the tortoise, Achilles could never reach the finish, but here the problem strikes even earlier and harder. If every journey requires first completing half of it, then before you take any step at all, you must complete infinitely smaller steps first. There is no first tiny distance to cross, because any distance can always be halved again. And so, Zeno slyly suggested, motion cannot even get started, and the runner is frozen before the race has begun. You are trapped before your foot has even left the ground, paralyzed by pure logic. It is enough to make anyone question what motion even means. No wonder these riddles have refused to die for 24 long centuries. What was Zeno really trying to accomplish with these dazzling mental traps? He was not, despite appearances, merely playing clever games to show off his wit. Every paradox was a carefully aimed weapon in the great battle to defend his master Parmenides. If the ordinary belief in motion leads to such hopeless contradictions, he reasoned, then maybe that belief is simply wrong. And if motion is an illusion, then perhaps Parmenides was right all along, and reality truly is the single changeless whole he had described. The puzzles were servants of a much grander philosophical purpose. Never forget that behind every puzzle stood a fierce love for a misunderstood teacher. The games were dazzling, but the purpose was deadly serious. Consider the sheer audacity of what this thinker was attempting to do. He was using the power of pure reason to argue against the plainest, most undeniable facts of everyday experience. Everyone knows that arrows fly, that runners win races, that we cross rooms 1,000 times a day without trouble. Zeno looked directly at these obvious truths and declared that logic itself proved them impossible. It takes a rare and fearless kind of mind to trust an argument so completely that it will follow reason straight off the cliff of common sense. Most of us would trust our eyes and walk away, but Zeno was not most people. He would rather follow logic into madness than abandon it halfway. That kind of fearless honesty is exactly what separates a great mind from a comfortable one. For many centuries, people struggled to say exactly what was wrong with Zeno's reasoning. Some dismissed his puzzles as mere tricks, clever wordplay unworthy of serious thought, yet they could never quite explain the flaw. The great difficulty was that his logic seemed, step by step, to be perfectly sound, even when its conclusions were plainly false. How can a chain of reasoning be flawless and yet lead somewhere absurd? This gnawing question would haunt philosophy and mathematics for more than 2,000 relentless years. That is the deepest kind of intellectual torment, a flawless path to an impossible place, and it kept the finest minds awake for centuries. No puzzle in the ancient world was better designed to torment a thoughtful person. At the heart of the problem lay a concept that terrified ancient thinkers, the idea of infinity. Zeno's puzzles all depend on dividing a finite distance into infinitely many smaller pieces. The ancient Greeks had no proper way to handle the infinite, and the notion of adding up an endless series of numbers filled them with confusion and dread. How could you possibly add together infinitely many things and get a sensible finite answer? Without a solution to that riddle, the arguments of Zeno stood like an unbreakable wall across the path of reason. To the Greeks, infinity was less a tool than a monster lurking at the edge of thought, and Zeno had learned to summon it at will. To wield infinity as a weapon, as he did, was an act of daring genius. A true escape from his traps would not arrive for more than 2,000 years. It came with the birth of a beautiful and powerful branch of mathematics dealing with the infinitely small. Mathematicians eventually discovered something that would have astonished the ancient world, that an infinite series of numbers can add up to a finite total. The endless halves that Achilles must cross, 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 and onward forever, add up neatly to a single whole. In that discovery lay the key that finally unlocked the cage Zeno had built. What the ancients dreaded, later mathematicians learned to tame and even to love. And with that taming, the old riddles began to loosen their grip. The wall that had blocked reason for ages was finally beginning to crack. Let me show you the resolution in the simplest possible way, for it is genuinely lovely. When Achilles chases the tortoise, each gap he must close is smaller than the one before, shrinking without end. Although there are infinitely many gaps, they grow tinier so quickly that all of them together add up to a finite distance and a finite time. Achilles crosses that whole infinite series in an ordinary, measurable moment and passes the tortoise exactly as your eyes always told you he would. The infinite, it turns out, can fit inside the finite, and that single insight dissolves the paradox at last. Something endless, packed carefully enough, can still be crossed in a single breath. It is one of the most beautiful ideas in all of mathematics. Yet we must be careful not to dismiss Zeno as merely a man who was cleverly wrong. His paradoxes were not foolish mistakes, but profound challenges that pushed human thought forward for millennia. By insisting that motion and infinity be understood clearly, he forced generation after generation of thinkers to sharpen their ideas. The very mathematics that finally answered him was developed, in part, because minds like his refused to let the questions rest. In losing the argument, Zeno gave humanity one of the greatest gifts a thinker can offer, a problem worth 2,000 years of thought. A wrong answer that inspires 2,000 years of brilliance is worth more than 100 easy truths. In that sense, Zeno never really lost at all. Pause to marvel at how startlingly modern some of his puzzles still feel today. Questions about whether space and time can be divided forever or whether they come in tiny, indivisible chunks sit at the frontier of modern physics. When scientists probe the smallest possible scales of reality, they wrestle with issues that Zeno first raised on a Mediterranean coast so long ago. His arrow, frozen in its instant, still flies through the equations of those who study the deepest nature of time. The ancient Greek continues to whisper his riddles into the ear of cutting-edge science. The boundary between the possible and the impossible is exactly where he loved to stand, and modern science keeps finding him already there. Beyond the puzzles themselves, Zeno left a lasting mark on how human beings argue and reason. His method of assuming an opponent's position and driving it to absurdity became a cornerstone of logic and debate. Philosophers ever since have used this technique, known as reduction to absurdity, to test and topple ideas. Every time someone says, "Let us suppose you are right," and then shows that this leads to nonsense, they are wielding the weapon Zeno forged. He taught us that you can defeat an idea not by attacking it head-on, but by following it faithfully to its ruin. It is a strange kind of immortality to live on inside the very method of thinking. Yet that is precisely what this ancient logician achieved. Long after his puzzles are solved, his way of thinking lives on in every sharp debate. One striking image has been passed down to us of Zeno as more than just a thinker. According to some ancient accounts, he was not only a brilliant logician, but also a man of great personal courage and conviction. The stories tell that he became involved in a plot to overthrow a cruel tyrant who ruled over a city. When the conspiracy was discovered and Zeno was captured and tortured, he is said to have refused to betray his fellow conspirators. Here, it seems, was a philosopher who would defend his principles not only with arguments, but with his very life. The mind that could trap Achilles could also, it seems, defy a tyrant without flinching. And that combination makes him unforgettable. A logician with the heart of a rebel is a rare and dangerous thing indeed. Tales of his final hours are dramatic, defiant, and more than a little gruesome. One version claims that when the tyrant demanded the names of his accomplices, Zeno pretended to whisper them, then bit down and refused to let go of the tyrant's ear. Another story tells that he bit off his own tongue and spat it at the cruel ruler so that torture could never force a confession from him. Whatever the truth of these grisly legends, they paint a portrait of a man of extraordinary defiance. The same fierce spirit that armed his arguments seems to have armed his heart. Legends, of course, love to exaggerate, but they rarely gather around the timid. Around Zeno, they gathered thick and dark and fierce. The gruesome glory of these stories has kept his memory burning for millennia. Think about the strange unity between the logician and the rebel in this one remarkable person. In his philosophy, Zeno refused to accept easy answers, following reason wherever it led, no matter how uncomfortable. In his life, he refused to accept tyranny, resisting a cruel ruler, no matter the terrible cost. Both the thinker and the fighter shared a single quality, an unbending commitment to what they believed was right. There is something deeply admirable in a mind that will not surrender, whether the enemy is a bad argument or a wicked king. Whether facing a broken argument or a brutal king, he simply would not yield. And in both arenas, that refusal was his greatest strength. A single unbending will ran through everything he ever did, in thought and in life alike. When we step back and survey the whole of his achievement, its scale is astonishing. From a small city on the Italian coast, armed with nothing but words and logic, Zeno reshaped the course of human thought. He invented a method of reasoning still used in every philosophy classroom on Earth today. He posed puzzles so deep that they helped drive the development of mathematics for over 2,000 years. And he did it all in service of a vision of reality that most people found impossible to believe. Few thinkers in all of history have done so much with so little. A handful of arguments, and the world of thought was permanently changed. That is the strange power of a truly original mind, to echo across thousands of years.
Perhaps the greatest lesson of Zeno is not any single paradox, but the power of a well-asked question. He may have been wrong about motion, and Achilles may catch his tortoise after all, yet the questions he raised were pure gold. A brilliant question, his life reveals, can be far more valuable than a hasty answer, driving inquiry forward for generation after generation. In daring to doubt the most obvious things, he opened doors that led to discoveries he could never have imagined. The courage to question, he teaches us, is the very engine of human understanding. That, more than any tortoise or arrow, may be his truest and lasting gift. The question that will not die is worth more than gold. To ask the right question, he shows us, is sometimes greater than to answer it. So, the next time you rise and walk across a room, let a small shiver of wonder pass through you. In that ordinary motion hides a mystery that puzzled the greatest minds for 2,000 years, a riddle of infinity folded into a single step. Zeno of Elea took the most obvious act imaginable and revealed the strange depths hidden beneath it, and in doing so, he taught humanity to look twice at everything it thought it knew. His arrows still fly, his tortoise still crawls, and his questions still shimmer at the edge of our understanding. That is the immortality of a truly great thinker, to make the whole world stranger and more wonderful than it was before. You will feel infinity hiding quietly inside a single, ordinary stride, and you will understand, at last, why his name has never been forgotten.
Zeno of Elea lived and died more than 2,400 years ago, and yet the puzzles he crafted on that distant Italian shore have never stopped haunting the human mind, from the ancient philosophers who first heard them to the physicists and mathematicians who wrestle with them still. He was the devoted student who loved his master Parmenides so fiercely that he built an entire arsenal of dazzling arguments to defend him, using pure logic to attack the most obvious facts of everyday life, and daring the whole world to prove him wrong. His swift Achilles, who could never catch a tortoise, his arrow frozen forever in flight, his endless halving of every journey, these were not the foolish errors of a confused man, but profound challenges that would push mathematics and philosophy forward for 2,000 relentless years. In the end, the discovery that an infinite series can add up to a finite sum finally set Achilles free to win his race. Yet the deeper gift of Zeno was never a puzzle to be solved, but a way of thinking to be treasured, the fearless method of following an idea all the way to its breaking point. His was a mind that would not bow, not to a lazy assumption, and not, if the old stories are true, even to a tyrant's torture, biting back against cruelty with the same ferocity he brought to a flawed argument. If his strange and brilliant riddles have stirred something in you, then let them remind you that the most ordinary things can hide the deepest mysteries, that a single great question can outlive empires, and that the human mind is never more alive than when it dares to doubt what everyone else believes is obvious. So walk across your room, watch the arrow fly, and marvel that a man from an ancient coast taught us to find infinity hiding in a single step.